No one knows who Billy Jack is. I'm like, I kept
think
saying,
you and I are the only two here.
Everyone remembers Frank Fritz as the guy with a friendly smile, the one who traveled the back roads of America hunting for antiques and forgotten treasures. He was one half of the famous duo from American Pickers, a show that didn't just talk about rusty items and old barns, it told stories of people, history, and lost moments. Frank wasn't just picking old signs or motorcycles, he was picking memories. Fans saw him as someone real, someone who brought laughter to the screen, even when he and Mike Wolfe disagreed or joked around. But while the cameras showed one part of his life, there was a much deeper story unfolding behind the scenes, one that no one expected. At first, everything seemed fine. The show was a success, the fan base was growing, and Frank had become a familiar face in households across the country. He was known for his sharp eye, his sense of humor, and his love for unique pieces of the past. But like many celebrities, his public life was only one side of the coin. Behind the scenes, Frank was dealing with health issues, personal struggles, and eventually a slow, painful distance growing between him and the very people he once worked closely with. Fans started to notice something was off when Frank stopped appearing in new episodes of American Pickers. The producers didn't say much. There were some short statements, maybe a few hints here and there, but no clear explanation. Some people thought he had taken a break. Others believed he was fired. Whispers turned into rumors, and soon many were asking what really happened to Frank Fritz. The truth started to come out slowly. Frank had gone through surgery and had some serious health problems. He had also gone through a hard breakup, and people close to him said he had been struggling emotionally. His once lively presence began to fade from the spotlight, and the man who once brought joy to millions was now facing his battles alone. But even with all this, no one could have guessed how strange and serious the story would get. And then came the news that shocked everyone. Frank had suffered a stroke. He was rushed to the hospital, and for a while things didn't look good. Fans all over the world sent prayers and messages of hope. People remembered how much he had given to the show, and how his love for old things brought joy to new generations. There was a sense of heartbreak in the air. A man who had once seemed full of life was now lying in a hospital bed fighting for every breath. But the real shock wasn't the stroke, it was what came after. A new wave of questions began to rise. Some started to wonder if Frank's health had really been the only problem. Why had there been such a deep silence from some of his former co-stars? Why hadn't Mike Wolfe, who had worked with him for years, shared more details? And then even more puzzling, a name came up that no one expected: Rick Harrison. Rick, the well-known star of Pawn Stars, had never been directly linked with American Pickers. Sure, both shows were about history and collectibles, but they were completely separate worlds. So when whispers started that Rick's name had come up in connection with Frank's case, people were confused and curious. Was it just gossip? A coincidence? Or something more serious? That's when the hook of the story really grabbed people. Fans weren't just dealing with sadness over Frank's condition anymore. They were now caught in a web of mystery, drama, and suspicion. Questions swirled on social media. Did someone do something to Frank? Was there foul play involved? And why was Mike Wolfe suddenly at the center of a courtroom, holding what he claimed was evidence? At this point, most people still believed it was all just rumors. But something didn't sit right. The silence from certain individuals, the sudden mentions of hidden connections, and the emotional distance between old friends made everything feel strange. Fans who had followed the show for years were now seeing it in a different light. Still, one thing remained clear: Frank Fritz had lived a life full of passion. He loved what he did. He loved the road trips, the stories behind every item, and the thrill of finding something special where no one else thought to look. His fans loved him for that. He wasn't just a character on a show, he was someone who reminded people that the past still matters, and that every object has a story worth telling. That quote set what makes everything about his situation so hard to understand. How did things get to this point? How did someone who brought joy to so many end up surrounded by secrets and courtroom drama? And if there really is more to the story, what does it say about the people around him? The truth is, no one saw it coming. When fans first tuned in to see two guys digging through barns, they didn't think it would lead here. They didn't expect mystery, betrayal, or anything close to what's unfolding now. But here we are, with a beloved TV figure in the hospital, another former friend holding evidence, and a new name, Rick Harrison, pulled into a storm that's only just beginning. And this is just the beginning of the story. Something didn't feel right. That's what many people thought as more time passed and Frank Fritz still didn't return to American Pickers. At first, viewers waited patiently. Maybe he just needed a break. Maybe it was health-related. But soon it became more than just a break. Episode after episode aired without Frank, and no one really said why. Fans were left with questions and no real answers. Frank and Mike Wolfe had worked together for years. They were the faces of the show. They laughed, argued, found rare items, and told the stories behind them. To many people, they felt like old friends. So when Mike kept doing the show without Frank, it felt strange. There were statements made, but they felt cold and distant. Frank had been sick, yes. But was that the only reason he was gone, or was something else happening behind the curtain? Then came the interviews. Frank gave a few, and in them he seemed hurt, not just physically, but emotionally too. He talked about how he hadn't heard from Mike in a long time. He said he felt abandoned, that after everything they had been through together, Mike didn't even check in on him. Fans were shocked. How could that be? Weren't they close? Weren't they like brothers? The more Frank spoke, the more people started to see cracks in the friendship. He shared things that made it clear this wasn't just about health. There had been tension, maybe even betrayal, and it wasn't just with Mike. It seemed like others from the show had turned their backs too. This made people wonder, was Frank pushed out, and if so, why? People online started to dig deeper. Some fans posted side-by-side videos showing how the mood of the show had changed. Without Frank, it felt different. Less fun, less heart. And it wasn't just the fans noticing. Ratings started to drop. People missed the realness that Frank brought. He wasn't perfect, but he was honest. He made mistakes, but he owned them. That's why viewers connected with him. Then something even more confusing happened. Whispers of legal trouble began to surface. No one knew the full story, but the idea that court cases were now involved made everything feel darker. That's when Mike Wolfe's name popped up again, this time in a legal setting. At first, people thought it might be about money or contracts. But then a few small leaks started hinting at something much more serious. The words people began to hear were shocking. Words like evidence, testimony, and even suspicion. And in the center of it all, Frank Fritz. Not as someone giving evidence, but as someone people were trying to protect, or hide the truth about. The more people talked, the stranger it all sounded. That quote stuck when the curiosity turned into concern. What had really happened between Frank and Mike? Why was Frank now linked to legal trouble and rumors? And if Mike had evidence, what was he holding on to? People needed answers, and fast. What made it worse was the silence. Mike Wolfe didn't say much. He shared some public words hoping for Frank's recovery, but those felt safe, almost scripted. He didn't address the real issues, the friendship, the hurt, the mystery. And Frank couldn't say more either. After the stroke, he wasn't speaking publicly anymore. It was like the whole truth had been locked away. Some fans believed Mike had something to hide. Others thought maybe he was trying to protect someone. But from what? If this was just about a broken friendship, why was a courtroom involved? Why were documents being mentioned, and who else might be involved that we don't even know about yet? All of this created a strange and sad feeling for longtime viewers. This wasn't just a TV show anymore. This was real life, with real people, and now possibly real danger. The man they had watched for years was now in the middle of a story no one saw coming. That's when people began asking another important question: what if someone had taken advantage of Frank during his weakest moments? He had health problems, emotional struggles, and he felt alone. Was there anyone who stepped in to help, or were people stepping over him instead? And if Mike knew something about that, was he ready to finally speak? The mystery grew even bigger when someone mentioned Rick Harrison's name. That came later, but it added a twist that no one expected. Rick was a big name in reality TV, but he had no real link to Frank or Mike, at least not publicly. So why was his name being whispered in the same conversation? Was it a connection through business, through the collectibles world, or something else entirely? For now, all fans could do was watch and wait. Some believed that more would come out soon, that court documents or interviews might reveal the truth. Others feared the truth might never come, and that Frank's side of the story might never be told completely. But one thing was clear: what had once been a fun and light-hearted show had now become something much deeper and much darker. Frank Fritz wasn't just a guy on TV anymore. He had become the center of a mystery that involved silence, secrets, and maybe even betrayal. And people were no longer asking, "Where is Frank?" They were asking something even more serious now: what happened to him, and who knows the truth? Nobody expected him to speak. Not anymore. Not after everything that had happened, but then one day in a packed courtroom full of tension and questions, Mike Wolfe finally stood up. The man who had once laughed beside Frank Fritz on TV was now standing in front of a judge. His face was serious. His hands were holding something, and what he was about to say would change everything. People didn't know what to think. Why was Mike here? What was he doing in court? This wasn't about the show anymore. This wasn't about a missing cast member or a broken friendship. It had turned into something much deeper, something darker. And now Mike Wolfe was no longer just a TV star. He was a witness. The room went quiet as Mike started to speak. He didn't look like the guy from American Pickers anymore. There was no smile, no jokes, no stories about old signs or classic bikes. This was different. He said he had something to show. Something important. Something connected to Frank Fritz and the strange events surrounding him. People leaned forward. Some gasped. What could it be? Was this really about Frank's stroke, or was there more to it? Mike said he had kept quiet for a long time. He said he didn't want to believe what he had learned. But now he couldn't stay silent. Not anymore. He held up documents. Not just papers, but what he called evidence. He didn't go into full detail in front of everyone, but he made it clear that what he had wasn't just rumors or stories, it was real. And it pointed to something shocking. Someone close to Frank may have had a reason to hurt him, or at least hide something from the world. That was the moment when everyone in the room seemed to stop breathing. This wasn't just about friendship anymore. This was about truth. And maybe justice. Mike Wolfe's voice shook at times, but he stayed calm. He said Frank had been like a brother to him. Once. They had traveled the country together. They had spent years finding treasures in the dust, but he also admitted that things had changed. The bond had faded. Mistakes were made on both sides. But still he said he had never stopped caring. That was why he was here now. Because something didn't add up. Because Frank wasn't just sick. He was silent. And Mike believed there were people who wanted it to stay that way. People who knew things. People who might even be responsible for how bad things had gotten. The courtroom was full of reporters. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but the news started spreading fast. Mike Wolfe, the quiet one, the guy who never stirred drama, had just opened the door to a mystery no one was ready for. He didn't give every detail that day, but he gave enough to get everyone talking, and wondering, who was he talking about? Who was this person, or these people, who may have hurt Frank? Was it someone from the show? Someone from Frank's personal life? Or was it someone even more unexpected? That's when another strange thing happened. As soon as the story hit the media, more people started coming forward. People who had known Frank in his final months before the stroke. People who had seen things, heard things. Little things that didn't seem important at the time. Sudden phone calls, money troubles, people showing up uninvited, documents going missing. All of it sounded small on its own, but together it painted a troubling picture. Some said Frank had felt paranoid near the end, that he was worried someone was after him, or at least watching him. Others said he had started keeping to himself, not trusting anyone. And a few even mentioned that Frank had planned to talk to finally tell the world what he knew. But then before he could, he had the stroke. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe not. And now, Mike Wolfe, the man many thought had abandoned Frank, was the one standing in court trying to speak for him. It didn't make sense, but maybe that's what made it so powerful. It also made people wonder, why now? Why was Mike speaking up only now, months later? Was it guilt? Was it fear? Or had he just found something so serious that he had no choice? And more importantly, what exactly was in that evidence? Some reports said it involved emails and messages. Others whispered about strange bank activity. But no one knew for sure, because the real details were sealed, protected, hidden for now. That only made people more curious. What was so sensitive that it couldn't be shared? What was Mike trying to protect, or expose? And just when people thought it couldn't get any stranger, one name started to pop up again. Rick Harrison. It still didn't make sense. Rick was from Pawn Stars, not American Pickers. They were part of the same world. Sure, antiques, deals, old stuff. But they had never worked together. Or had they? Could there have been a secret connection between them? A deal gone wrong? A personal conflict that was never made public? Nobody could answer that yet. But now that Mike had spoken in court, everyone wanted to know more. Fans were asking questions on forums, on YouTube, on social media. What happened to Frank? What was Mike hiding before? And what role, if any, did Rick play in all this? The answers weren't clear, but one thing was, the story wasn't over. In fact, it was only just beginning. And the more Mike spoke, the more people started to believe that something big was coming. Something that would finally reveal the full truth behind Frank's fall, his silence, and the secrets people had been keeping. No one saw this coming. A courtroom, a witness, and a mystery tied to a man who once just wanted to find old treasures in dusty barns. But now he had become the biggest mystery of all. It all started to feel like a puzzle. A confusing, twisted puzzle with missing pieces and strange turns. Frank Fritz was in a hospital bed, silent and weak, while outside in courtrooms and online. His name was everywhere, but not for the reasons fans wanted. People weren't talking about his favorite picks, his adventures, or his love for old motorcycles. They were talking about secrets, about betrayal, and maybe something worse. After Mike Wolfe showed the documents in court, things began to move quickly. News channels picked up the story. Headlines started appearing, not just in entertainment blogs but in real news outlets. People everywhere were asking the same question: what happened to Frank Fritz? The courtroom scene had changed everything. Mike wasn't just a former co-star now. He was a key figure in a mystery that was growing deeper by the day. When he mentioned that the evidence pointed towards someone close to Frank, everyone started to guess who it could be. Fans remembered the tension between Frank and some of the show's crew. They remembered how suddenly Frank was gone, how quiet everyone had become, and how cold the goodbye had felt. But then something strange happened. A new witness stepped forward. This person wasn't a big name. They didn't work on the show, but they claimed to have seen something strange on one of the last days Frank was seen out in public before his stroke. The witness said they saw Frank arguing with someone in a parking lot late at night. The person he argued with, they couldn't say for sure, but they remembered the voice. And later, when they heard that same voice on a TV interview, they said it gave them chills. This only added more confusion. Who was this mystery person? Could it be someone fans already knew? Was it Mike? Was it Rick? Or someone else from Frank's private circle? The police didn't say much. They never do at first. But they confirmed that a new report had been added to Frank's case file. That's when the word investigation started showing up in the media. This wasn't just courtroom drama anymore. It wasn't just about business deals or missing contracts. It was becoming something criminal. And that scared a lot of people. It also brought more pressure on Mike Wolfe. Some people supported him. They said he was brave for speaking up, for trying to stand up for his old friend. Others weren't so sure. They asked why he waited so long. They wondered if he was protecting himself by coming forward first. Maybe he had been part of something and now he wanted to shift the blame. Nobody knew for sure. But the internet was full of opinions, theories and questions. Rick Harrison's name kept popping up too. He hadn't made a public comment yet, not even once. That made people even more suspicious. Normally Rick wasn't afraid to speak his mind. He was known for being bold and confident, but this time silence. Why? What did he know that he wasn't ready to share? Some fans started digging into old interviews. A few years back there was a short clip where Rick mentioned meeting Mike Wolfe at an event. It seemed innocent back then, just two TV stars talking about collectibles. But now that clip was being watched in a whole new way. Was there more to that meeting? Had they been working on something behind the scenes? That's when a rumor started spreading online. A rumor about a secret deal, one that involved both shows, American Pickers and Pawn Stars, and a collection of rare items that were worth millions. People said Frank had been close to that deal, maybe even too close. And maybe someone didn't want him involved anymore. There was no proof yet, just whispers, guesses, and what-ifs. But the idea made sense to some people. Frank was known for being stubborn. He didn't like being left out. If he found out something shady was happening, he wouldn't have kept quiet. Maybe that's why things went bad. Maybe that's why he ended up alone, sick and out of the spotlight. No one could say for sure. And that's what made the story so haunting. Meanwhile, Frank's condition wasn't improving much. He was still recovering, still unable to speak for himself. His close friends said he had good days and bad days, but he wasn't ready to face the world again. Not yet. Maybe not ever. That quote what made Mike's voice so powerful. Whether people trusted him or not, he was now the only one speaking for Frank, and that was a heavy weight to carry. Some fans began writing letters to Frank. Others posted videos online, sharing memories and sending love. There was a feeling of loss, not just because Frank was sick, but because everything he had built seemed to be falling apart. The show was still going, but it didn't feel the same. The magic was gone. And still no real answers. No one arrested. No clear proof, just more questions. What did Mike's documents really show? Why was Rick's name involved at all? And what had Frank discovered before everything went wrong? It felt like everyone was holding their breath. waiting for the next piece of the puzzle to fall into place. The world had watched Frank Fritz chase forgotten treasures across America for over a decade. Now the greatest mystery of his life was the one no one could solve. And this time the story wasn't playing out on TV, it was playing out in courtrooms, in hospitals, and in the hearts of millions who still cared about the man who once brought the past back to life. As Mike Wolfe continued to stand by his statements in court, more people began to question him. Some fans supported him, thinking he was doing the right thing. Others were more skeptical. They wondered if Mike was hiding something. Was he being completely honest about what he knew, or was there something bigger he wasn't saying? No one could quite tell, but that was part of the mystery. The pressure on Mike was growing. As more people began talking about the case, the pressure on Rick Harrison grew as well. Rick had stayed silent, but now, his silence was starting to speak volumes. Everyone knew that Rick was not someone who usually kept quiet for long. He had built his entire career on being outspoken and confident, but now, he was nowhere to be found. Not a word. Not an explanation. The mystery surrounding Rick's silence was as loud as any statement he could have made. Fans and media outlets began looking back into Rick's history with the show and with Mike. There were stories of tensions between the two stars. There were whispers about business deals that had gone wrong behind the scenes. People had always seen Mike and Frank as a team, but they started wondering if there was more to the story. Could it be that Mike had a reason to be the only one standing in the spotlight now? Could it be that Rick's role in the story was something people were not ready to hear? The more Mike spoke, the more questions arose. He had mentioned evidence, he had pointed to a few pieces of paper, a few photographs, but no one had seen the full picture. The court had sealed most of the details, but that only made people more curious. What was in that evidence? Why was Mike holding on to it for so long? And why hadn't Rick said anything about it? The uncertainty was almost unbearable. But then, just as everyone thought they were about to get answers, things took another unexpected turn. A new person came forward, someone completely different from the people who had spoken before. This person wasn't a public figure or a well-known name. In fact, most people had never heard of them. But they had something to say that made everyone stop and listen. They claimed to have known Frank during the final months before his stroke. They spoke about Frank's feelings, his thoughts, and some of the troubling things he had shared with them in private. They said that Frank had become paranoid, not just about his health, but about the people around him. He had believed that someone was watching him. He had started to question the people he had once trusted the most. The new witness didn't name names, but their words were enough to set off alarms. Had Frank been afraid of Mike? Had he felt betrayed by someone close to him? The possibility that Frank had started to see his old friends as threats was both surprising and disturbing. Could it be that Frank's fears had been real? Could it be that someone had been taking advantage of him during a vulnerable time? It wasn't just a theory anymore. It was a possibility that needed to be investigated. The more this new witness spoke, the more people began to wonder if they were about to uncover something big. Was this just a coincidence? Or was it the final piece of the puzzle that everyone had been waiting for? The witness's words were chilling. They spoke of Frank's growing distrust, his isolation, and his worry that he was being watched. They even mentioned that Frank had been keeping a journal, a private record of his thoughts, but the journal was nowhere to be found now. Was it lost, destroyed, or hidden? And if it was hidden, why? Meanwhile, Mike continued to stay in the spotlight. He had made his claims. He had pointed fingers. But now as the new witness came forward, it felt like he was being pushed into a corner. He had no choice but to answer the growing list of questions. But did he have the answers? Or was he just as much in the dark as everyone else? He didn't seem to have all the information, but the pressure was building. The more people dug into Frank's life, the more they realized that something much deeper was going on. This wasn't just about a missing cast member. It wasn't just about a show that had lost its spark. It was about a real person, a person who had been betrayed in ways no one had expected. As Mike tried to respond to the growing number of questions, more evidence started to surface. Some people claimed to have seen Frank on the phone with someone just days before his stroke. They said he seemed frantic, as if he had just learned something that changed everything. Was it possible that Frank had uncovered something about his own life, something that made him afraid? The idea that Frank might have stumbled upon something big, something dangerous, made everyone take a step back. The mystery continued to unfold in the most unexpected ways. New people came forward, new theories formed, and the investigation deepened. But there was still so much that no one knew. What had really happened to Frank? What was Mike hiding? And where did Rick Harrison fit into all of this? The story that had started out as a simple disagreement between friends had grown into something far more complex, something that could change everything. As the days went by, everyone seemed to be waiting for the final moment when the truth would finally come to light. But with each new twist and turn, it became clear that this story was far from over. The silence, the secrets, and the unanswered questions left people on the edge of their seats. Was the truth going to be revealed soon, or was it going to stay hidden forever? For weeks, Mike had been the center of attention. He had shared what he knew, or at least, what he was willing to share. But with every statement, more doubts grew. Why had Mike waited so long to speak out? Was there something he was afraid to reveal? People started looking at his actions more closely. Was he truly trying to help Frank, or was he protecting himself? Was there more to his silence in the beginning? Had he been involved in something he didn't want the world to know about? The pressure was mounting. More and more people started to question Mike's motives. Some felt he was being genuine, but others weren't so sure. The fact that he had waited this long to speak made people wonder what he had been hiding. Could it be that Mike knew more than he was letting on? Or was he just a man caught in the middle of a situation he didn't understand himself? Everyone wanted to know the truth, but it seemed like the closer they got to it, the more complicated it became. And then there was Rick Harrison. The longer he stayed quiet, the more suspicious his silence became. People were used to Rick being outspoken, even in the most uncomfortable situations. So why wasn't he saying anything? Was it possible that he was involved in something that would ruin his reputation? Had he been involved in Frank's life more than anyone realized? Was he part of something darker, something no one could have predicted? At first it seemed like Rick might just be staying out of the limelight on purpose. Maybe he didn't want to get caught up in the drama. But as time went on, people started to wonder if there was more to it. Was Rick hiding something? Had he known what was happening to Frank and kept quiet about it? The mystery of Rick's silence was becoming just as big a part of the story as anything else. Meanwhile, the investigation continued to unfold. New details were coming to light, though no one could put everything together just yet. Rumors were flying. Some said they had seen Frank and Mike in a heated argument just before Frank's stroke. Others said that Frank had started to act strangely in the days leading up to his illness. Could it be that Frank had discovered something shocking, something that had made him afraid for his life? Had he seen something he shouldn't have? Had he uncovered a secret that made him a target? There were also rumors about strange phone calls Frank had received. Some people said they had heard Frank on the phone with someone, and he sounded upset. Was he talking to someone from the past, or was it someone involved in the mystery that no one could yet figure out? Frank's behavior in the days before his stroke was starting to look more and more suspicious, and the more people talked about it, the more unanswered questions there were. But even with all the rumors, there was still no hard evidence. No one could say for sure what had happened. All they had were pieces of a puzzle, and they couldn't fit them together. Mike was still holding on to his documents, but he hadn't revealed everything. What was in those papers? Why couldn't he just tell the world everything he knew? Could it be that there was more to the story than anyone was ready for? And then just when it seemed like things couldn't get any more complicated, a shocking new development emerged. A former member of the production team from American Pickers came forward. This person claimed to have witnessed something that could change everything. According to them, there had been several private meetings behind closed doors. These meetings involved not just Mike and Frank, but other figures from the world of reality TV. The production team member didn't have all the details, but they said that something had gone terribly wrong. There were talks of contracts, money, and decisions being made without Frank's knowledge. Was it possible that Frank had been kept in the dark about something big? Had he been betrayed by people he trusted? These new revelations only added to the growing tension. Everyone was left wondering, what was the truth? Was Mike really trying to do the right thing by speaking out? Was he hiding something? And what about Rick? Could he be involved in something darker than anyone realized? The more people tried to piece together the story, the more tangled it became. In the midst of all this, Frank's condition remained unchanged. He was still recovering, still unable to speak for himself. His silence was both heartbreaking and frustrating. People wanted answers, but it seemed like Frank was the only one who could provide them. But would he ever be able to speak again? Would he ever be able to tell the world what had happened? It was a painful waiting game, and no one knew when it would end. Mike and Rick were both facing questions they couldn't easily answer. The public was demanding the truth, and the pressure on both of them was growing. But even as the investigation moved forward, there was still so much left unknown. What had really happened to Frank? Had he discovered something he shouldn't have? And why was Mike the one who seemed to know so much, yet refused to share everything? The story was far from over. With each new revelation, the mystery deepened. People were desperate for answers, but the truth seemed just out of reach. The more they searched, the more the story slipped through their fingers. And as they waited for the truth to come to light, the questions kept piling up, one after another. Would they ever know what happened to Frank? Would Mike and Rick ever come clean? And would the truth finally emerge, or would it remain buried forever, just like the many treasures they had once hunted together? The answers seemed to be locked away, hidden behind layers of secrecy and lies, and the world could only wait to see if the truth would ever come to the surface.